The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song above Dr. Sarah Chen's desk as she arranged her papers with meticulous precision. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and the Intelligence Division of the Naval Operations Command was still quiet, just the way she preferred it. The office was a maze of cubicles and cramped workstations, a bureaucratic labyrinth where thousands of analysts processed classified information for decisions made by people far more important than themselves. Sarah had occupied the same corner cubicle for 7 years, and in all that time, only 2 people had learned her name: the IT technician who came to fix her computer, and the security guard who occasionally questioned her badge when she arrived before everyone else. She didn't mind the invisibility. In fact, she'd come to appreciate it. Sarah had earned her PhD in linguistics and cryptography from MIT, graduating summa cum laude at 24 years old. She'd been recruited by the Navy with promises of meaningful work, opportunities to protect her country, and a career that would utilize her brilliant mind. What she discovered instead was a world where brilliance meant nothing if you lacked the right personality, the right connections, or the right willingness to self-promote. She was quiet by nature, not shy exactly, but contemplative. She preferred listening to speaking, observing to participating. In a military hierarchy built on confidence, charisma, and commanding presence, Sarah was fundamentally invisible. Her colleagues had long ago stopped trying to include her in conversations. The senior analysts didn't seek her input in strategy sessions. The admirals who occasionally walked through the division never glanced twice at her workstation. She'd learned to accept this, even to exploit it. While others worried about office politics and climbing the chain of command, Sarah buried herself in her work. She read every intercepted communication, studied every satellite image, analyzed every thread of intelligence that crossed her desk. She saw patterns others missed because she had the luxury of time that came from having no meetings to attend, no networking events to participate in, no superiors demanding her presence. It was this obsessive attention to detail that had saved her career from becoming completely meaningless. 3 weeks ago, Sarah had stumbled across something while cross-referencing intercepted Taliban communications with supply chain logistics data. The patterns were subtle, hidden in the noise of routine military chatter, but she saw them. Someone, likely a mid-level intelligence officer with access to classified operations briefings, was leaking information about upcoming Navy SEAL missions. The leaks were sporadic and carefully disguised, never obvious enough to trigger alarms, but consistent enough to follow once you knew what you were looking for. Sarah had traced the information back to its source: a growing enemy network in Kunar province that was intercepting SEAL operations with uncanny precision. She'd reported her findings to her supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, a perpetually distracted officer who spent more time on his phone than reviewing reports. He'd glanced at her analysis for perhaps 30 seconds before thanking her and filing it away. She never heard about it again. But Sarah couldn't let it go. For the past week, she'd been tracking the leaked information through different channels, connecting dots that formed a terrifying picture. A major operation was scheduled to launch in 48 hours, one of the most significant SEAL missions in months. The operation was called Phantom Needle, and its target was a high-value Taliban commander operating out of remote mountain strongholds. Sarah had accessed the preliminary briefing documents through classified channels, studying the insertion plans, the extraction routes, the coordinates, the timeline. Then she'd cross-reference them with the enemy intelligence network she'd identified. The match was perfect, devastatingly perfect. The enemy knew. They knew exactly where Bravo Platoon would be inserted. They knew the timing. They knew the terrain. They were preparing an ambush that would be waiting with rockets, machine guns, and coordinated fire from positions that had likely been scouted weeks in advance. 12 of the most highly trained warriors in the world were walking into a trap, and no one knew it but Sarah. She should have gone higher up the chain of command. She should have requested an emergency meeting with the commanding officer. She should have followed proper protocol and let the system work. But Sarah had spent 7 years watching the system fail. She'd watched her legitimate concerns disappear into bureaucratic black holes. She'd watched senior officers dismiss analysis because it came from someone they didn't respect, someone they didn't even really see. And now, with the lives of 12 men hanging in the balance, she couldn't afford to be invisible. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold. Sarah sat in the back corner of the classified briefing room at 800 hours, her security clearance granting her access to the Phantom Needle operations briefing. The room was dominated by a massive oak table where senior officers sat, admirals, commanders, intelligence chiefs, strategic operations planners. Their uniforms were crisp, their bearing authoritative, their voices confident as they discussed the mission with the casual certainty of men accustomed to being right. Sarah's eyes tracked every detail. She watched Commander James Reeves as he presented the operational timeline. He was in his mid-40s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent half his life in hostile environments. His voice was steady and measured, his bearing professional. He clearly believed in this mission. He clearly believed his men would execute it flawlessly. He clearly had no idea that death was waiting in the mountains. She listened as the briefing covered insertion routes, extraction plans, rules of engagement, and contingency protocols. No one mentioned the intelligence vulnerability. No one discussed the possibility that their plans had been compromised. No one even acknowledged the possibility that an enemy force might be waiting. Sarah's chest tightened with frustration and fear. When the briefing concluded and officers began filing out, she remained seated in the back corner, her presence so unremarkable that the security personnel conducting exit checks didn't even make eye contact with her. She watched Commander Reeves gather his files, watched him shake hands with senior officers, watched him prepare to lead his team to their probable deaths based on intelligence that was fatally compromised. She had to do something. She had to break the silence that had defined her career, that had protected her, that had kept her safe from attention and judgment. She had to risk everything, her career, her security clearance, possibly even legal consequences, to reach a man who didn't know her name and convince him that an invisible analyst's warning was worth more than the orders of every officer in this room. Sarah returned to her cubicle and began typing. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment all her life without realizing it. She compiled her evidence meticulously: satellite imagery, intercepted communications, logistics data, mathematical analyses. She wrote a message in stark, undeniable language that explained the threat and the solution. She encrypted it through channels that shouldn't exist, routed it through servers that couldn't be traced, and sent it to Commander James Reeves' secure communications device. Then she waited, heart pounding, knowing she just stepped into the light. The message sent at 11:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Sarah spent the next 4 hours staring at her computer screen without processing a single word of work. Her hands trembled as she pretended to review intelligence reports, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd done. She'd violated the Espionage Act. She'd breached classified protocols. She'd circumvented the entire chain of command. If discovered, she wouldn't just lose her job. She could face federal charges, imprisonment, the complete destruction of everything she'd worked for. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest like a physical force. By 3 p.m., she still hadn't heard anything. Commander Reeves either hadn't received the message, hadn't read it, or had dismissed it as the work of a crank. Sarah felt her stomach twist with dread. What if he reported it to his superiors? What if the encryption was weaker than she thought and the message could be traced back to her? She'd been so careful, using multiple anonymization layers, routing through civilian servers in countries with no extradition treaties. But the military's cybersecurity division was staffed by people almost as brilliant as she was. Almost. She forced herself to stay until 5:47 p.m., working through her lunch break and remaining late to appear normal. Around her, the office hummed with the quiet routine of people doing important jobs. No one paid her attention. No one ever did. She packed her bag slowly, her heart still hammering against her ribs, and walked toward the exit. That's when her secure phone vibrated. Sarah froze in the hallway, her hand instinctively moving to the device clipped to her belt. It was a number she didn't recognize, a military line with routing codes indicating it originated from the Naval Special Warfare Command. She held the phone, watching it vibrate again, knowing she could ignore it. She could pretend she never saw it. She could walk away and hope this went away. Instead, she answered. Dr. Chen. The voice was male, controlled, and carried the unmistakable cadence of someone accustomed to command. This is Commander James Reeves. I believe you have information about Operation Phantom Needle. We need to talk. In person. Now. Commander Reeves sat in a secure communications room 20 miles from the naval base, surrounded by electromagnetic shielding and counter-surveillance equipment. The message had arrived on his encrypted device at 11:47 a.m., exactly 4 minutes after it was sent. His initial reaction had been skepticism, a standard response to anonymous warnings that violated protocol. But his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Marcus Sterling, had run a preliminary analysis on the attachments and returned with an expression that made Reeves' blood run cold. Sir, this is legitimate, Sterling had said, pulling up satellite imagery on the secure terminal. Whoever sent this has access to classified materials beyond typical analyst clearance. Look at these intercepts. They've traced a leak pattern through enemy communications networks. The math checks out. The timing checks out. Our insertion coordinates are compromised. Reeves had read the analysis 3 times, verifying every calculation, cross-referencing every data point. The anonymous analyst was right. Catastrophically, undeniably right. Someone in the intelligence apparatus had leaked information about Phantom Needle, and an enemy force was preparing an ambush that would annihilate Bravo Platoon. But who was she? How had she obtained this information? And more importantly, why had she risked everything to send it? He'd spent the afternoon conducting discreet inquiries, identifying potential sources within the intelligence division who might have access to the kind of information presented in the message. The search had led him to Dr. Sarah Chen, a ghost of a woman who worked in the back corner of a cubicle farm, whose name appeared on dozens of analytical reports that never received credit, whose presence was so unremarkable that most people in her own division couldn't have described her. It was the kind of profile that made perfect sense. Someone with access, intelligence, and nothing to lose because no one was paying attention to her anyway. He'd authorized a trace on the message's origin point, a procedure that normally took 48 hours but that he'd expedited using his command authority. The results came back pointing toward Dr. Chen's secure workstation, routed through sufficient anonymization layers to suggest professional-level cryptographic knowledge. It was her. It had to be her. Sarah sat across from Commander Reeves in a secure conference room deep within the Naval Special Warfare Command facility. The drive had taken 45 minutes, and she'd spent every moment convinced she was being transported to a military prison. Her hands were folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Reeves studied her with the careful attention of a man trained to assess threats and evaluate people under pressure. What he saw was a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a conservative gray blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes reflecting a combination of fear and determination. "You understand the gravity of what you've done," Reeves said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "You've violated classified protocols, breached the chain of command, and potentially committed federal crimes." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the terror flooding through her. "And I'd do it again." Reeves leaned back in his chair, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. How did you identify the leak?" For the next 2 hours, Sarah walked Reeves through her analysis. She explained the patterns she'd identified in intercepted communications, the supply chain logistics that didn't add up, the mathematical probabilities that suggested inside knowledge. She detailed how she'd traced the information back through multiple channels, how she'd cross-referenced it with the Phantom Needle operational timeline, and how she'd realized the ambush was being prepared with precision that only advanced knowledge could provide. Reeves listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "Why didn't you go through your chain of command?" he finally asked. "I did," Sarah answered quietly. "My supervisor filed my initial report and never mentioned it again. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've watched this operation move forward without any acknowledgement of the intelligence vulnerability. I've watched senior officers plan a mission they believed was secure when I knew it was compromised. I watched the timeline accelerate toward launch. And I realized that no one was going to listen to me because I'm invisible. I'm the person people forget about 5 minutes after meeting me. I'm the analyst whose reports get filed and forgotten. So I made the choice to break that invisibility, to risk everything, because if I stayed quiet and your team walked into that ambush." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Reeves stood and walked to the secure window overlooking the base. "You've committed serious crimes, Dr. Chen. There's no way around that, but you've also just saved the lives of 12 men. That carries weight. That matters." He turned back to face her. "I'm going to make some phone calls. You're going to remain here while I do, and then we're going to figure out what happens next." Sarah nodded, understanding that her old life, the invisible life, was over. What came next was terrifyingly uncertain. But as she watched Commander Reeves leave the room to make his calls, she felt something unexpected: relief. For the first time in 7 years, someone had truly seen her. The CH-47 Chinook helicopter cut through the Afghan night sky, its rotors thundering against the darkness like the heartbeat of some mechanical beast. Inside the cargo bay, 12 Navy SEALs sat in combat gear, their faces painted in black and green camouflage, their expressions focused and calm. These were men who trained their entire lives for moments like this, men whose bodies had been forged in the crucible of military discipline, whose minds had been sharpened through countless hours of tactical planning and operational preparation. They knew the mission, they knew the terrain, they knew their roles, and they trusted their commander absolutely. Commander James Reeves sat among his men, his jaw clenched tight as the helicopter descended toward the insertion point. His eyes were fixed on the mission timeline displayed on the tactical tablet in his lap, but his mind was elsewhere, circling back repeatedly to Dr. Sarah Chen's analysis, to the evidence of the compromised intelligence, to the question that had haunted him for the past 12 hours. Should he trust the warning of an analyst no one had ever heard of, or should he trust the judgment of a room full of admirals and senior officers? The operation was called Phantom Needle for a reason. The target was Mullah Akbar Khan, a high-value Taliban commander responsible for coordinating insurgent operations across 3 provinces. Intelligence suggested he was hiding in a series of caves in the remote Kunar Mountains, moving between locations on a predictable but varied schedule. The original plan called for Bravo Platoon to insert at coordinates designated as Landing Zone Alpha, establish a perimeter, move 3 kilometers northeast through mountain passes, and intercept Khan during what was predicted to be his movement between safe houses. The insertion point was selected specifically because satellite imagery showed minimal enemy activity in the area. The terrain favored their approach. The timing aligned with predictive models of Khan's movement patterns. Everything about the operation was sound, or so everyone had believed. Except Sarah Chen had shown him that everything was wrong. Lieutenant Michael Torres, Reeves' second-in-command, sat across from him in the helicopter bay. Torres was a 12-year veteran with a reputation for tactical brilliance and an unwavering loyalty to his commander. He'd served with Reeves for 8 years and could read his commander's mood with uncanny accuracy. Torres watched Reeves studying that tablet with an intensity that went beyond standard pre-operation review. Something was wrong. Something had changed. The helicopter began its descent toward landing zone Alpha. Through the open cargo door, the Afghani landscape emerged from darkness. Jagged mountains silhouetted against a star-filled sky, rocky terrain that looked like the surface of some alien world. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to insertion. Prepare for deployment. The SEALs checked their weapons one final time, a ritualistic motion performed with mechanical precision. Magazines verified, safety set, communicators tested. Every man had performed this same choreography hundreds of times. Their training transcended conscious thought. It lived in their muscles, in their reflexes, in the deep patterns of their nervous systems. Reeves made a decision that would save their lives. He activated the encrypted comm channel and transmitted to the helicopter pilot. Abort insertion at landing zone Alpha. Redirect to alternate coordinates. I'm uploading new GPS data now. Static crackled through the headset. Then the pilot's voice returned, confused but professional. Sir, those coordinates are 2 kilometers west of the planned insertion. We were specifically briefed on landing zone Alpha. I'm aware, Reeves replied, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a commander who would not tolerate questions. Execute the redirect now. Lieutenant Torres, prepare the platoon for modified insertion. Torres' eyes widened slightly as he processed what was happening. He'd never known Reeves to deviate from an operation plan mid-deployment. It was fundamentally contrary to military doctrine. Operations succeeded through precision execution of established plans, not last-minute improvisations. But Torres didn't question his commander. He simply relayed the new coordinates to the rest of the platoon through squad communications. New insertion point 2 kilometers west, Torres announced. Prepare for modified approach. Commander's orders. The SEALs exchanged rapid glances, their training kicking in as they mentally recalibrated their tactical approach. These were men who could adapt to changing circumstances in real time, who could shift operational parameters with the fluid ease of chess masters seeing 3 moves ahead. Reeves knew his team would execute the new plan as flawlessly as they would have executed the original. The helicopter banked sharply, its route shifting across the dark landscape. Below them, the mountains stretched endlessly, a wilderness where insurgent fighters could be hiding in any shadow, behind any rock formation, in any of the 1,000 caves that dotted the terrain. 1 minute to modified insertion, the pilot announced. Reeves gazed out at the landscape, his mind running through the tactical implications of his decision. If Sarah Chen was wrong, if the original intelligence was accurate and the insertion point was actually secure, then his team would be 2 kilometers from their objective and would waste valuable operational time regrouping and moving to the correct position. The mission timeline would be compromised. The window of opportunity to intercept Mullah Khan might close. But if Sarah Chen was right, if the enemy was waiting at landing zone Alpha with rockets and machine guns and coordinated fire prepared specifically for their arrival, then his team was now alive. It was a gamble built on faith in an analyst he'd never met, a woman so invisible that most of the military hierarchy wouldn't recognize her name. The helicopter touched down in the rocky terrain, dust and sand exploding outward in a blinding cloud. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, exiting the aircraft in perfect formation, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning the surrounding darkness for threats. The helicopter lifted away immediately, its rotors thundering back into the night sky, leaving 12 men alone in the Afghan wilderness. Reeves established the perimeter and conducted a tactical assessment. The new insertion point was militarily sound, rocky terrain providing natural cover, elevation advantage overlooking the approach routes, clear sightlines for establishing a defensive position. The team hunkered down, weapons ready, waiting for orders. Then Reeves activated the secure communications channel and transmitted encrypted data back to Naval Command, updating them on the insertion point change and providing his reasoning. The response came back rapidly, confusion and concern evident in the operational coordinator's voice. But Reeves was the commander on the ground, and his authority to make tactical adjustments for security reasons was absolute. For the next 30 minutes, the platoon maintained position in silence, watching the darkness, listening to the sounds of the Afghan night, wind through mountain passes, the distant call of a night bird, the occasional clatter of loose rock. Then, approximately 47 minutes after their original scheduled insertion time, it happened. The sky to the east suddenly erupted in fire. Explosions tore through the night, lighting up the landscape in brilliant orange flashes. Rocket fire screamed through the air, impacting the terrain where Landing Zone Alpha had been located. Machine gun fire chattered in coordinated bursts, creating a killing field designed specifically for American soldiers. For 90 seconds, the enemy force concentrated devastating firepower on the coordinates where Bravo platoon should have been standing. The platoon watched in stunned silence as their intended grave exploded before them. When the firing finally ceased, when the echo of explosions faded into the Afghan night, Reeves heard the soft exhalation of breath from his men, the sound of warriors confronting their own mortality, understanding with absolute clarity that they were alive only because their commander had trusted a warning that no one else had believed. Lieutenant Torres moved closer to Reeves, his voice barely audible through the encrypted comm. "Sir, how did you know?" Reeves watched the smoke rising from the distant landing zone, watched the figures of enemy fighters moving through the rubble, searching for casualties that would never come. "Someone was watching out for us," Reeves replied quietly. "Someone invisible." The enemy's shock lasted approximately 43 seconds. That was the window of opportunity Bravo platoon had to move. Reeves made the tactical assessment instantly. The ambush force would regroup, would organize search parties, would expand their perimeter looking for their vanished prey. Staying in their current position meant waiting to be surrounded. The only option was aggressive movement, capitalizing on the enemy's disorientation and the chaos of their failed ambush. "Move out," Reeves commanded through the encrypted comm. "Tactical dispersal formation. Weapons free. We move now or we die here." The platoon responded with mechanical precision, their training overriding the adrenaline surge that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. 12 men became 3 four-man teams, spreading across the mountainous terrain in a formation designed to maximize firepower while minimizing their tactical footprint. They moved rapidly but carefully, using the rocky landscape as cover, their night vision equipment transforming the darkness into a ghostly green landscape where every shadow could conceal death. Behind them, the enemy force was mobilizing. Reeves could hear the coordination, radio chatter in Pashto, the sound of trucks being started, the purposeful noise of a military force that had just realized their carefully planned ambush had failed catastrophically. But they had numbers. Reeves estimated at least 50 combatants in the immediate area, with more potentially reinforcing from nearby positions. Bravo platoon's 12 warriors were outnumbered 4-1, and that ratio would only get worse as word spread about the American incursion. The next 2 hours became a desperate game of tactical chess played across terrain that offered limited options. The enemy knew the mountains better than the SEALs did, understood the terrain's nuances, possessed local knowledge that no amount of satellite imagery could replicate. But Bravo platoon had training that transcended geography. They had discipline, tactical flexibility, and a commander who was making decisions with uncanny precision. That precision came from encrypted messages, arriving on Reeves' secure tablet at precisely the right moments. "Enemy patrol approaching from northeast in 3 minutes," the encrypted text read. "Recommend holding position in grid coordinates provided. They'll miss you by approximately 150 meters." Sarah Chen's voice was speaking to them from thousands of miles away, providing intelligence that was saving their lives. Reeves redirected the team, guiding them into a rocky outcropping that seemed to offer minimal tactical advantage. But 47 seconds later, an enemy patrol moved through the adjacent terrain, their figures visible in the distance, their weapons ready, their search patterns indicating they were looking for something without knowing what. The SEALs remained motionless, their weapons trained on the patrol, capable of dispatching them silently, but choosing restraint because Reeves understood that engaging every enemy fighter they encountered would quickly overwhelm their ammunition supply and tactical flexibility. The patrol passed within 167 meters of their position. Sarah's estimate had been accurate. "Drone strike incoming," another message appeared on the tablet. 2 kilometers southeast of your position. 7 minutes until impact. Recommend moving to new coordinates immediately. Reeves studied the provided coordinates and made a snap decision to move toward them. The terrain they'd been planning to occupy was objectively superior from a defensive standpoint, but Sarah's intelligence suggested it would be targeted. He trusted her judgment over his own battlefield instincts, a decision that felt profoundly counterintuitive, but that had already proven correct once. The team moved through the night, their pace accelerated by the knowledge that death was descending from the sky. They'd covered approximately 2 kilometers when the entire landscape behind them erupted in flame. A drone strike, precise, devastating, designed to eliminate a target that had vanished minutes before its arrival. The explosion illuminated the mountains like hellfire, sending rock and dirt cascading down the slopes. "Direct hit on your previous position," Sarah's message appeared. "Enemy believes they've eliminated you. Security protocols suggest they're expanding search radius and calling in additional forces." Reeves felt a cold appreciation for the woman he'd never met. She wasn't just providing tactical intelligence. She was thinking several moves ahead, anticipating enemy responses, predicting military logic the way a chess grandmaster predicted moves. She was seeing the battlefield from a perspective that only someone with access to multiple intelligence streams could achieve. The night deepened. Bravo Platoon moved through terrain that seemed designed by some malevolent god to maximize suffering. Rocky pathways that cut through their boot soles, elevation changes that left their legs screaming, the constant threat of exposure against a backdrop of hunters who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The SEALs operated on the edge of human endurance, their training the only thing keeping exhaustion from consuming them. Then, around 300 hours, the tactical situation escalated beyond anything they'd anticipated. "Multiple enemy positions mobilizing," Sarah's message reported. "Intelligence suggests Taliban Central Command received notice of American incursion. They're coordinating province-wide response. Estimate 200 additional combatants arriving within 4 hours. Recommend immediate strategic repositioning." 200 fighters. The numbers were becoming catastrophic. Reeves studied the map data Sarah had provided, analyzing the terrain, calculating movement vectors, trying to identify positions where 12 men could survive against overwhelming numerical advantage. The only option was finding defensible terrain where superior American training and firepower could substitute for numerical disadvantage, high ground, limited approach vectors, clear sightlines that would prevent the enemy from using their numbers effectively. "There's a position," Sarah's next message indicated, with exact coordinates and topographical data. "Abandoned observation post from Soviet occupation. Multiple defensive positions, natural water source, terrain restricts approach to 2 main vectors. Enemy forces moving to surround your current position but haven't yet encircled. If you move immediately, you can reach this position before they cut off your escape route." It was a gamble, but every option available to them was a gamble. Reeves gave the order, and Bravo Platoon began a desperate forced march toward the coordinates Sarah had provided. They moved with the urgency of men who understood they were racing against clock and enemy alike, their muscles burning, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their minds focused entirely on survival. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, the elevation climbing steeply, the rocky paths becoming treacherous in the darkness. One SEAL, Petty Officer First Class James Harmon, twisted his ankle severely on exposed rock. Tours wanted to stop, wanted to establish a perimeter and deal with the injury properly, but Reeves understood they didn't have time. He authorized a modified carry-and-move protocol, with 2 team members assisting Harmon while maintaining movement toward the coordinates. As dawn broke over the Afghan mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and shadow, Bravo Platoon reached their destination. The abandoned Soviet observation post was exactly as Sarah had described, a concrete structure built into the mountainside, offering multiple defensive positions, high ground advantage, and terrain that could be held by a small force against numerically superior enemy. They set up perimeter security, established observation posts, and checked weapons and ammunition. They'd survived the night. They'd evaded overwhelming odds. They'd made it to defensible terrain. But as Reeves studied the landscape surrounding them, watching dust clouds rising in the distance, evidence of enemy forces converging on their position, he understood that survival was only beginning. The siege was coming. The enemy had them pinned on a mountainside, and their only lifeline was an invisible analyst thousands of miles away who was feeding them intelligence through encrypted channels. Reeves composed an encrypted message to Sarah. "We've reached the position you identified. Thank you for keeping us alive. We're going to need you in the next 72 hours more than ever before." The response came back instantly. "I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you. Let's keep you alive." 72 hours. That was the timeline Naval Command had given Bravo Platoon, 3 days to survive on a mountainside surrounded by an estimated 200 enemy combatants, until extraction helicopters could be arranged and a tactical withdrawal could be coordinated. 72 hours seemed like an eternity when every moment was measured in heartbeats and ammunition expended. The first day began with disciplined silence. Reeves established strict communication protocols, no unnecessary transmissions, minimal movement, complete radio silence on standard military frequencies. The observation post became a fortress, with each SEAL assigned to defensive positions that maximized coverage of the approach routes. Harmon's ankle was wrapped and taped, reducing his mobility but not his combat effectiveness. In the SEAL teams, you fought even when wounded, even when exhausted, even when the odds were mathematically impossible. Sarah's intelligence feed became a constant presence. Messages appeared on Reeves' encrypted tablet with the regularity of a heartbeat, updates on enemy positions, warnings about incoming patrols, tactical assessments that allowed Reeves to adjust their defensive posture before threats became critical. Enemy search party moving north through canyon below your position. An encrypted message appeared at 8:47 hours. 6 fighters. They'll pass approximately 300 meters east of your perimeter if you remain silent. Engagement recommended only if discovered. The SEALs watched through their rifle scopes as the enemy patrol moved through the canyon, their figures tiny and distant against the mountainous backdrop. The patrol passed without detecting the American position. Bravo Platoon's silence held. But as the day progressed, the enemy search pattern became more sophisticated. They weren't randomly wandering the mountains anymore. They were conducting a systematic sweep, using terrain features to create concentric search circles, coordinating movements that suggested military training and tactical planning. Someone was directing that search. Someone understood how to hunt American Special Operations Forces. Enemy command post established at grid coordinates provided, Sarah's message warned. Approximately 5 kilometers southeast of your position. They're coordinating search operations from there. Suggest monitoring their communications for tactical advantages. Reeves authorized tours to attempt intercepting the enemy communications frequency. The Taliban fighters were using encrypted channels, but military encryption was often less sophisticated than American systems. Tours, who'd studied cryptography as part of his SEAL training, managed to penetrate the encryption and began monitoring their tactical frequency. The information flow was immediate: enemy positions, search strategies, movement vectors, all being coordinated in real time from that command post. "We could take that command post," Torres suggested, his voice low but intense. "Eliminate their coordination capability, level the playing field." Reeves shook his head. "We move off this mountain, we expose ourselves. Our advantage is defensive positioning. We hold here, we survive. We go out hunting, we die." But the tactical information from the enemy frequency provided Sarah with additional data points. She began cross-referencing enemy communications with her satellite imagery, her predictive algorithms, her ability to see patterns in seemingly random military movements. Her intelligence became exponentially more valuable. By the second day, the siege had become desperate. Enemy forces had established cordons around their mountain position, creating a noose that tightened with each passing hour. The SEALs could hear them at night: distant shouts, vehicle movements, the construction of defensive positions designed to cut off any escape route. The enemy wasn't trying to assault the observation post directly. They were trying to contain it, to pin Bravo platoon in place, to wait for reinforcements, to eventually overwhelm through sheer numerical advantage. "Incoming drone strike, 12 minutes, Sarah's message warned. "Enemy coordinating aerial reconnaissance. Recommend moving southeast observation team to secondary position immediately." Reeves acted without hesitation, redirecting the southeastern security team to an alternate defensive position. 17 minutes later, a drone strike hit their original position, destroying fortifications and equipment but finding no human targets. The enemy was learning, adapting, escalating their tactics. That's when the machine gun fire came. A coordinated assault from the north, approximately 30 fighters advancing up the mountain slopes in tactical formation, laying down suppressive fire designed to pin Bravo platoon while allowing them to close distance. The SEALs responded with devastating accuracy, their weapons trained by years of combat experience, their aim deliberate and lethal. Bodies fell on the mountainside, but more enemy fighters kept coming, replacing casualties, maintaining pressure, refusing to break. Ammunition consumption was catastrophic. In 6 minutes of intense firefight, Bravo platoon expended nearly 1,000 rounds. The casualty count among enemy forces was high, at least 15 confirmed kills, but the assault had achieved its purpose, forcing the SEALs to deplete ammunition and psychological resources. "Helicopter extraction cannot be authorized in current tactical environment," Naval Command transmitted. "Enemy forces too numerous for safe approach. You need to survive 72 hours minimum." 72 hours. They'd survived approximately 36. Halfway there. But ammunition was becoming critical, food was rationed, water supply was manageable but limited, and the human body had limits to how long it could operate under extreme stress. Sarah's intelligence became their lifeline through the second night. "Enemy assault planned for 300 hours, her message warned. "Approximately 50 fighters coordinating from command post. They're attempting night assault to overwhelm your position through numerical advantage and darkness. Recommend establishing additional perimeter defenses immediately." Reeves reorganized their defensive positions, concentrating firepower on the expected approach vectors. When the assault came at 3:12 hours, Bravo platoon was ready. The night erupted in controlled violence, muzzle flashes illuminating the darkness, the sharp crack of weapons fire, the screams of dying men. The enemy assault broke against the American defensive lines like waves against a cliff. Bodies accumulated on the slopes. Ammunition continued depleting, but the observation post held. By the third day, Desperation had replaced all other emotions. The enemy seemed infinite, more fighters arriving constantly, fresh supplies being delivered, tactical adjustments being made to account for American defensive capabilities. The siege had become a war of attrition that favored the side with numbers. Bad news, Sarah's message arrived at 10:42 hours on the third day. Enemy has positioned artillery approximately 8 kilometers southwest of your location. Estimate first strike within 2 hours. Your position is not sufficiently hardened to survive direct artillery impact. Reeves felt something cold settle into his chest. Artillery was a game changer. Defensive positions didn't matter against concentrated explosive firepower. They needed to move. They needed to evacuate the observation post and find new terrain before the artillery began falling. But extraction helicopters couldn't arrive for another 18 hours minimum. They didn't have 18 hours. They didn't even have 2 hours. "We need extraction now," Reeves transmitted to Naval Command, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of a commander understanding his team was running out of time. "Enemy artillery incoming. Our position is compromised." The response came back through layers of military bureaucracy and tactical assessment. Helicopter extraction was being authorized, but it would take 90 minutes to position assets. 90 minutes to get from their current location to the extraction point. 90 minutes to survive crossing open terrain against enemy positions. "I have a route," Sarah's message appeared on the tablet. "It's risky. It'll expose you to enemy fire at certain points, but it avoids their prepared ambush positions and gets you to extraction coordinates before artillery strike. I'm uploading the route now." Reeves studied the path Sarah had provided, tracing it mentally across the landscape, understanding the tactical implications of each turn, each elevation change, each exposed section. It was audacious. It violated standard military doctrine. It relied on precise timing and split-second tactical decisions. "We move in 5 minutes," Reeves commanded. "Gather what we can carry, leave the rest. We move fast, we move hard, and we trust the intelligence we've been given." Torres began coordinating the platoon's movement, consolidating essential equipment, destroying sensitive materials that couldn't be recovered, preparing weapons and ammunition for rapid deployment. Harmon's ankle had worsened overnight, the swelling increasing despite treatment. He could barely walk, much less run. But Harmon refused to be left behind. Torres assigned 2 SEALs to assist him, understanding that the team moved together or not at all. 90 minutes until extraction, Reeves transmitted to Sarah. "Get us there alive and I'll buy you dinner." Sarah's response came back with a hint of emotion that transcended the clinical nature of intelligence analysis. "I've never been bought dinner. Let's make it happen, Commander." Bravo Platoon moved out of the observation post into the Afghan sunlight, abandoning their fortress and beginning a desperate race toward survival. Sarah Chen had stopped sleeping approximately 36 hours ago. She sat in a secure room that had been hastily prepared for her on the Naval Operations Command Base, surrounded by multiple computer terminals displaying satellite feeds, intercepted communications, tactical maps, and real-time data streams. Her coffee had gone cold around 200 hours that morning, replaced by a thermos of black tea that she sipped mechanically without tasting it. Her eyes burned from staring at screens. Her fingers ached from constant keyboard input. Her lower back screamed from sitting in the same chair for nearly 40 hours straight. None of it mattered. What mattered was keeping 12 men alive. When Commander Reeves had authorized her temporary assignment to coordinate real-time intelligence support for Bravo Platoon, she'd been given access to classified systems far beyond her normal clearance level. Satellite imagery feeds provided by National Reconnaissance Office satellites designed to monitor enemy positions and tactical movements. Intercepted communications routed through NSA listening stations. Real-time drone footage from military assets positioned across the Afghan theater. Personnel files, logistics data, supply chain information, entire universes of classified intelligence that had previously been unavailable to someone at her level. She was committing crimes with every data access, every file opened, every intelligence assessment compiled. If discovered, if her actions were reviewed by military investigators, she would face federal charges that would result in decades of imprisonment. But as she watched the real-time satellite imagery showing enemy forces mobilizing around Bravo Platoon's position, as she listened to intercepted Taliban communications discussing tactical plans to ambush American soldiers, that concern felt distant and meaningless. 12 men were running toward extraction, and she was their only lifeline. Enemy patrol moving east on Route 7, Sarah transmitted at 10:47 hours. 2 vehicles, approximately 12 combatants. They're intercepting your approach vector in approximately 6 minutes if you maintain current trajectory. Recommend immediate course adjustment to coordinates provided. Route detours north but avoids contact. She watched the tactical map as Commander Reeves' icon adjusted direction, the team vectoring north along the path she'd calculated. The enemy patrol continued east, completely unaware that the Americans they were searching for had altered course based on real-time intelligence provided by a woman watching through satellite cameras from thousands of miles away. Sarah cross-referenced the intercepted communications, isolating specific Taliban commanders directing the search operations. She identified their tactical frequency, their command structure, their communication protocols. She began predicting their movements by understanding their military logic, where they would position units, which terrain they would prioritize, how they would respond to the Americans' movements. It was like playing chess against an opponent whose moves she could see seconds before they made them. Artillery preparation fire beginning in 4 minutes, a new data stream announced. Enemy fire control radar had locked onto coordinates, calculating firing solutions, preparing to rain explosives down on terrain where they believed American soldiers were still defending the observation post. Sarah transmitted the warning immediately, watching through the satellite feed as Bravo Platoon increased their pace, moving faster across the mountainous terrain despite the risk of exposure. Behind them, the mountainside erupted. Artillery shells impacted the observation post with devastating force, destroying the fortifications they'd abandoned only minutes before. The explosions were captured in real time by satellite imagery, brilliant orange flashes lighting up the Afghan landscape, rock and earth exploding upward, fortifications disintegrating under the force of coordinated fire. They'd made it out with approximately 90 seconds to spare. That was too close, Reeves transmitted through encrypted channels, his voice containing an edge of controlled tension. They're adjusting fire, moving artillery targets south along the mountain ridge, Sarah responded, her fingers flying across keyboards as she monitored the tactical situation. Estimate next strike in 3 minutes. You need to move faster. Recommend pushing southeast through the canyon system. It'll provide overhead cover from artillery observation. She pulled up the canyon imagery on her screen, studying the terrain, calculating angles, ensuring that the route she was proposing actually provided the protection she claimed. The canyons were narrow, restricting enemy movement, but also limiting American tactical flexibility. If they encountered enemy fighters in the canyon system, extraction from narrow terrain would be extremely difficult, but the artillery fire was more immediate threat than ground combat. Executing canyon movement now, Reeves confirmed. Sarah monitored their progress through the canyon system using satellite imagery, watching their tactical icons move through the narrow passages, watching for enemy positions, calculating threats. She intercepted enemy communications discussing the Americans' new trajectory, heard Taliban commanders discussing potential ambush positions in the canyon system. Enemy fighters preparing ambush position at Canyon Junction 3 kilometers ahead, Sarah transmitted urgently. Approximately 25 combatants. They're expecting you to move through the main canyon passage. Recommend moving to secondary canyon system. It's slightly longer but bypasses their prepared ambush. Route details uploading now. She pulled tactical map data, sent it through encrypted channels, watched as the tactical icons adjusted course again, veering away from prepared ambush positions, following a secondary route that only Sarah's analysis could have identified. The escape became a pattern. Sarah identified threats. Reeves adjusted course. Bravo platoon moved to new positions where enemy forces had not yet positioned themselves. It was a deadly dance performed at breakneck pace, where every decision meant the difference between survival and annihilation. 45 minutes to extraction, Sarah transmitted at 11:33 hours. You're ahead of schedule. Enemy forces are disorganized. They're not coordinating effectively. They're searching terrain where you've already passed. Because of your intelligence, Reeves' response came back. They're one step behind us because you're 3 steps ahead of them. Sarah felt something emotional surge through her exhausted mind. Gratitude, recognition, the profound sensation of being appreciated by someone who understood the weight of what she was doing. She'd spent 7 years invisible, her work unrecognized, her contributions forgotten. And now, in the most critical moment of her life, she was being seen. She was being valued. She was being acknowledged as essential. Helicopter inbound. A new transmission interrupted her thoughts. Chinook transport with military medical support. ETA to extraction coordinates 17 minutes. Maintain current trajectory. Sarah began coordinating with the helicopter pilot, providing real-time updates on enemy positions, recommending approach vectors that minimized exposure to ground fire. She was managing a symphony of tactical information, satellite feeds, intercepted communications, predictive algorithms, real-time threat assessments, all flowing through her mind and being channeled through encrypted communications to keep Bravo platoon alive. Enemy forces converging on extraction point. A new alert appeared on her screens. Sarah watched through satellite imagery as Taliban fighters mobilized toward the coordinates where the helicopter would be landing. They'd realized where the Americans were going. They were attempting to mount a final desperate assault to prevent the extraction. Sarah did the calculation instantly. The enemy fighters would arrive at the extraction point in approximately 8 minutes. The helicopter would arrive in 12 minutes. There was a 4-minute window where enemy forces would be in position, but the helicopter would not yet be there. Bravo platoon, enemy forces will occupy extraction zone in approximately 8 minutes, Sarah transmitted. Helicopter will arrive in 12 minutes. 4-minute exposure window where enemy can engage without helicopter support. Recommend accelerating movement. You need to reach extraction coordinates before enemy forces are fully positioned. We're pushing as hard as we can, Reeves' response came through, his voice tight with strain. Harmon's ankle is getting worse. We're moving him between 2 team members, but it's slowing us down. Sarah studied the terrain, calculating movement vectors, measuring distances in her head. The mathematics were brutal. Even moving at full speed, even pushing beyond normal human capacity, Bravo platoon would reach the extraction point approximately 2 minutes after enemy forces achieved favorable positioning for an ambush. I'm going to eliminate that timeline, Sarah transmitted. She began accessing restricted systems, classified drone control interfaces, tactical aircraft coordination channels, real-time weapons authorization protocols. She was violating multiple federal laws, accessing military systems far beyond her clearance, initiating military actions that should require multiple layers of authorization. But she was invisible. No one was watching her. No one was tracking her access. She moved through the classified systems like a ghost, accessing what she needed, initiating what was necessary. Air support inbound, she transmitted to Reeves. Apache helicopter gunship redirected from eastern sector. Estimated arrival at extraction zone simultaneous with enemy forces. They'll establish suppressive fire, allow you safe approach to Chinook transport. Within minutes, the Apache helicopter arrived over the extraction zone, its missiles and Gatling guns immediately establishing devastating suppressive fire on the converging enemy forces. The Taliban fighters scattered, taking cover, their coordinated assault disintegrating under professional military firepower. Chinook descending now, the helicopter pilot transmitted. All personnel prepare for immediate boarding. We launch in 90 seconds. Sarah watched through satellite imagery as Bravo Platoon approached the helicopter, as they helped Harmon aboard, as they secured their weapons and equipment. She watched as the Chinook's rotors accelerated, as the aircraft began climbing away from the extraction zone, as it moved higher and higher into the Afghan sky. All personnel accounted for, the helicopter pilot confirmed. Bravo Platoon is secure, we're heading home. Sarah sat back in her chair, the tension that had sustained her for 39 hours finally releasing. Her hands shook. Tears formed in her eyes, not from fear or stress, but from the overwhelming realization that she'd done it. She'd kept them alive, all 12 of them. She'd gone from invisible to essential, from overlooked to absolutely vital. And somewhere in that transformation, her entire life had changed. The Chinook helicopter's rotors thundered against the Afghan sky as it climbed away from the extraction zone, carrying 12 SEALs toward safety. But the journey from combat zone to secure base was far from over. Enemy fire pursued them, rocket-propelled grenades streaking upward through the air, machine gun rounds impacting the aircraft's fuselage with sharp metallic reports that echoed through the cargo bay. The pilot executed evasive maneuvers, banking hard left, then right, his movements designed to throw off the enemy's aim while maintaining altitude and forward velocity. Commander James Reeves sat on the jump seats lining the helicopter's interior, watching his men process the reality of their survival. Their faces were painted in camouflage, streaked with sweat and dust from 3 days of combat. Their eyes held the particular exhaustion that came from operating at the absolute limits of human endurance. But they were alive, all 12 of them. Every single member of Bravo Platoon had made it to the helicopter. Petty Officer James Harmon lay on a medical stretcher, his ankle elevated, an IV line running into his arm. The Army medic aboard the helicopter, a young specialist named Rodriguez, was assessing him for shock and dehydration. Harmon's ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the tissue black and purple from internal bleeding, the injury clearly severe enough to require hospital treatment. But Harmon was grinning despite the pain, the expression of a man who understood he'd cheated death. All personnel accounted for, Rodriguez reported to Reeves, moving through his medical assessment with practiced efficiency. Minor lacerations, contusions, one confirmed sprain. Harmon needs surgical evaluation for the ankle, but no life-threatening injuries that I can identify. You people are incredibly lucky, sir. Reeves nodded, understanding that luck had nothing to do with it. Luck implied randomness, implied chance, implied that survival had been a matter of probability and probability alone. But Bravo Platoon's survival had been calculated, engineered, carefully orchestrated by an invisible analyst thousands of miles away who turned data into life-saving intelligence. Lieutenant Torres moved to the seat beside Reeves, his expression serious despite the chaos surrounding them. The helicopter banked sharply as another RPG detonated approximately 40 meters from their starboard side, the explosion rocking the aircraft but missing the main fuselage. "That was insane, sir," Torres said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotor noise. The way she predicted their movements, the way she knew where the ambushes would be before they happened. I've never seen intelligence coordination work that effectively. "She saved our lives," Reeves replied simply. "All of us, every single one." Another explosion, closer this time. The helicopter shuddered, and Reeves heard the pilot's voice on the internal comm system, taking fire from multiple positions. Recommend increasing altitude and accelerating toward base. We're getting out of their effective range in approximately 4 minutes. The pilot's prediction was accurate. As the Chinook climbed higher, the enemy ground fire became increasingly ineffective, the trajectories of their weapons falling short of the ascending aircraft. Within 6 minutes, they'd transitioned to airspace where Taliban fighters couldn't reach them. The immediate threat had passed. Reeves activated his secured satellite phone and transmitted a message to Naval Command. Bravo Platoon extraction successful. All 12 personnel recovered. One significant injury requiring medical evaluation. Requesting immediate coordination with base medical facilities for arrival in approximately 45 minutes. The response came back within seconds, acknowledging the message and confirming that medical personnel would be standing by. Everything moved so fast now, from life-or-death combat to administrative coordination, from desperate survival to routine operational procedures. The mind struggled to adjust to the shift. But Reeves' attention was focused on one thing, ensuring that Dr. Sarah Chen was acknowledged for what she'd done. She'd risked her career, violated federal laws, and pushed herself to the absolute edge of human capability to keep his platoon alive. That deserved more than a quiet word of thanks. That deserved recognition, documentation, official acknowledgement. He composed another message, this one directed to the operational commander at Naval Special Warfare Command. Intelligence analyst Dr. Sarah Chen provided critical real-time support that directly resulted in successful mission completion and personnel recovery. Recommend official commendation and assignment review. 43 minutes later, the Chinook touched down at Bagram Airfield. Medical personnel rushed the aircraft, assisting Harmon onto a stretcher and transporting him directly to the hospital facility. The rest of Bravo Platoon moved into a secure debrief facility, where operational commanders and intelligence specialists waited to conduct the standard post-mission assessment. For the next 6 hours, Reeves and his men walked through every detail of the operation. The deviation from the planned insertion point, the ambush they'd avoided, the 3 days of siege, the desperate escape, the extraction. They provided tactical assessments, damage estimates, intelligence on enemy capabilities and coordination. They answered questions, reviewed satellite imagery, corroborated each other's accounts of the events that had transpired. But through every minute of the debrief, Reeves was acutely aware that one crucial element was missing. Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't being asked about her role. She wasn't being credited in the official accounts. Her intelligence work was being treated as background support rather than the critical lifeline it actually was. That changed when Reeves sat down, with the commanding officer overseeing the debrief. "Sir, I need to make something official," Reeves said directly. "Dr. Sarah Chen's intelligence analysis saved this platoon's lives, multiple times. She identified a compromised insertion point before we deployed. She provided real-time tactical intelligence during the siege. She coordinated air support that allowed us to reach extraction safely. Without her analysis and her work, Bravo Platoon would have been annihilated." The commanding officer, a senior Navy captain, studied Reeves with the careful attention of someone who'd been in military service long enough to recognize genuine sincerity. "That's serious commendation, Commander. You're telling me this operation's success hinges on one intelligence analyst?" "Yes, sir," Reeves replied. "Completely. Dr. Chen's work should be documented in the official mission report. Her contributions should be recognized and evaluated for advancement and commendation." The commanding officer made notes on the debrief document. "I'll ensure her role is properly documented. This kind of interagency coordination between field operations and intelligence support needs to be highlighted." But Reeves wanted more than official documentation. He wanted to meet her. He wanted to look Dr. Sarah Chen in the face and thank her personally for keeping his men alive. 24 hours after landing at Bagram, Reeves was on a transport aircraft heading back to the United States. Bravo Platoon remained at the base for additional medical evaluation and recovery, but Reeves had been authorized to return immediately to provide detailed intelligence assessments to the command structure. He landed at Naval Station Norfolk 48 hours after his departure from Afghanistan. That's when he officially requested a meeting with Dr. Sarah Chen. The meeting was scheduled for 1400 hours in a secure conference room. Reeves showered, changed into a clean uniform, and arrived early, his mind racing with what he wanted to say, how he wanted to express gratitude that seemed inadequate to the circumstances. When Dr. Sarah Chen walked through the conference room door at exactly 1400 hours, Reeves' first impression was her invisibility, or rather, the tangible quality of not being perceived. She moved quietly, her presence nearly unobtrusive, her movements economical and measured. She wore a conservative gray blazer and dark slacks, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes reflecting a combination of apprehension and something else, hope, perhaps, or anticipation. Reeves stood and extended his hand. "Dr. Chen, I'm Commander James Reeves. I wanted to meet you personally." Sarah took his hand, her grip surprisingly firm despite the nervousness evident in her expression. "I've read the mission report, sir. I'm glad your team made it back safely." "We made it back because of you," Reeves said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "I want you to understand that. Every single member of my platoon is alive because you saw something no one else saw, because you had the courage to break protocol, and because you stayed engaged through 3 days of combat coordination that saved our lives repeatedly." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being truly acknowledged. "I've never been thanked for my work before," she said quietly. "I've spent my entire career being invisible, and then suddenly I was the only thing that mattered." "You were always the only thing that mattered," Reeves replied. "The system just didn't know how to see it, but I see it. My team sees it, and everyone who reviews this mission will see it." He pulled out an official commendation document that had been prepared by Naval Command. It detailed Dr. Chen's contributions, her intelligence analysis, her coordination efforts that directly resulted in mission success and personnel recovery. It recommended her for advancement and proposed her assignment to a newly created position leading a specialized intelligence unit designed to support field operations. Sarah read the document with shaking hands, the words seeming almost unreal to someone who'd spent so long expecting her work to be dismissed and forgotten. "This is real?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Absolutely real," Reeves confirmed. "You're not invisible anymore, Dr. Chen, not to people who matter." Sarah Chen sat at her new desk on the 3rd floor of the Naval Operations Command building, sunlight streaming through the windows in a way that felt almost foreign. For the first time in her career, her workspace wasn't in a back corner, hidden away from casual observation. Instead, her desk occupied a position with actual visibility, in an office suite designed specifically for the newly created Intelligence Support Operations Unit. The nameplate on her door read, "Dr. Sarah Chen, Director, Field Operations Intelligence Coordination." It had been exactly 1 month since that first meeting with Commander Reeves in the secure conference room. 1 month since she'd been offered the position. 1 month since her life had fundamentally transformed from invisible to essential. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been resistance from senior officers who questioned whether someone with Sarah's background, someone from the back ranks of the analytical division, was qualified for such a prominent position. There had been logistical challenges in establishing a new unit, in recruiting personnel, in developing protocols for real-time intelligence coordination. There had been the overwhelming weight of new responsibilities, new expectations, new pressures that came with visibility. But there had also been something else: purpose, recognition, the extraordinary sensation of being valued for exactly who she was. The Intelligence Support Operations Unit had already coordinated support for 3 additional field operations, each one utilizing the real-time intelligence coordination method Sarah had pioneered during the Bravo Platoon crisis. The results had been consistently exceptional. Field teams reported unprecedented accuracy in threat prediction, improved tactical decision-making capability, and most importantly, 0 casualties in operations that would have previously been considered high risk. Word of the unit's success had spread through the military hierarchy. Other commands were requesting similar intelligence support. The Pentagon was evaluating whether the model could be expanded to support broader operational networks. Sarah had gone from invisible to genuinely influential, not through self-promotion or political maneuvering, but through the undeniable effectiveness of her work. On this particular Tuesday morning, Sarah was reviewing preliminary intelligence assessments for an upcoming operation when her office door opened without a knock. Commander James Reeves walked in, still in his dress uniform, his bearing as commanding and confident as it had been that day in the conference room. "Dr. Chen," he said, his expression carrying something between amusement and satisfaction, "I wanted to inform you officially that Bravo Platoon has been cleared for operational deployment." Sarah set down the document she'd been reviewing. "That's excellent news, sir. When does the operation launch?" 3 weeks, Reeves confirmed. "And I've specifically requested that the Intelligence Support Operations Unit provides real-time coordination. I trust your analysis. My team trusts your analysis. We're confident that with your support, this operation will be just as successful as Phantom Needle." There was something in his tone that suggested he was implying more than just operational success. Sarah tilted her head slightly, understanding the subtext. He was giving her an opportunity to do what she did best, to be valued for her contributions, to continue making a difference in the most direct and immediate way possible. "We'll be ready," Sarah confirmed. "I'm going to personally oversee the intelligence coordination for your operation." After Reeves left her office, Sarah sat quietly for a long moment, reflecting on how dramatically everything had changed. She pulled up her personnel file on her computer screen, reviewing the progression of her career. 7 years of reports that went unread, analysis that was filed and forgotten, contributions that were credited to others. 7 years of invisibility that had felt like imprisonment at the time, but that she now understood had been essential preparation for what she was capable of achieving. Her invisibility hadn't been a weakness, it had been her greatest strength. Because no one was watching her, no one was judging her, no one was evaluating her performance against political expectations, she'd been free to see what others couldn't see. She'd been free to ask questions that challenged conventional wisdom. She'd been free to trust her analytical instincts even when they contradicted the opinions of superior officers. Her invisibility had been a kind of freedom. But freedom without recognition felt hollow. What she discovered was that the real power came from combining that analytical freedom with the validation that came from being seen by people who mattered. That evening, Sarah attended a formal dinner at the Officers Club, an event she never would have been invited to before, an event she still felt somewhat out of place attending. But as she moved through the room, she found herself being introduced to senior commanders, being asked about her work, being treated with the respect typically reserved for senior officers and decorated veterans. Midway through the evening, Petty Officer James Harmon approached her. His ankle, which had required surgical repair, was still healing, and he moved with a slight limp. But his smile was genuine, his presence warm and appreciative. "Dr. Chen," he said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you personally. If you hadn't identified that insertion point vulnerability, I'd be dead right now. We all would be." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the weight of gratitude in his grip. "I'm just glad you're okay, Petty Officer. How's the recovery progressing?" "Better every day," Harmon confirmed. "I'll be back to full operational status within 6 weeks. And you know what? I'm looking forward to my next operation because I know you'll be coordinating the intelligence support. That gives me confidence I've never felt before." Over the course of the evening, similar conversations repeated themselves. Other members of Bravo Platoon approached Sarah individually, expressing gratitude, acknowledging her role in their survival, thanking her for the intelligence support that had kept them alive. Each interaction reinforced the reality of her transformation, from invisible to seen, from overlooked to valued, from background support to recognized essential contributor. Later that night, Sarah sat in her apartment, looking out at the Virginia landscape from her window. She thought about the girl she'd been, the brilliant MIT graduate who'd come to the Navy with such idealistic expectations, only to discover that brilliance alone wasn't enough if no one was paying attention to you. She thought about the woman she'd been for 7 years, competent, intelligent, utterly invisible, trying to convince herself that invisibility didn't matter because the work mattered. But the work only mattered if it was recognized, if it was valued, if it contributed to something larger than itself. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Commander Reeves. "Dinner tomorrow at 1900 hours. You promised to let me buy you dinner after this was all over. I figure we should make good on that promise." Sarah smiled, typing a response. "I'd like that, sir. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked right through me." His response came back almost immediately. "You were always visible to people who mattered. I just happened to be the first one who looked carefully enough to see." The next evening, Sarah sat across from Commander Reeves at a small Italian restaurant near the base. They talked about the operations they'd coordinated together, about Bravo Platoon's recovery, about the future of the Intelligence Support Operations Unit. But more than that, they talked about invisibility, about what it meant to move through the world unnoticed, about the particular kind of loneliness that came from being overlooked, about the profound relief of finally being seen. "You know what I realized," Sarah said as they waited for dessert. "My invisibility wasn't something that was done to me. It was something I allowed. I told myself I didn't need recognition because I was comfortable in the background. But really, I was just afraid of what would happen if people paid attention to me." "And now," Reeves asked. "Now I understand that being seen isn't dangerous, it's liberating. The people who matter see me now. They value my work. They appreciate my contributions. That's all I ever really wanted." Reeves raised his wine glass in a subtle toast, to visibility, and to intelligence that actually gets recognized. Sarah clinked her glass against his, feeling the symbolic weight of the gesture. She'd stepped into the light. She'd accepted the position leading the new intelligence unit. She'd agreed to coordinate support for multiple field operations. She'd let herself be seen, acknowledged, valued. And the most surprising part was discovering that visibility, recognition, and appreciation didn't diminish her analytical capability. If anything, they enhanced it. Knowing that her work mattered, that her insights were valued, that her warnings would be heeded, it elevated everything she did. 3 weeks later, when Bravo Platoon deployed for their new operation, Sarah coordinated real-time intelligence support from the Intelligence Support Operations Unit. She was no longer invisible, but neither was she distracted by the weight of recognition. She was simply doing what she did best, seeing patterns others missed, predicting threats before they materialized, providing the information that kept warriors alive. And as she watched the operation unfold flawlessly, as she received the message confirming that all personnel had been successfully extracted with 0 casualties, Sarah understood the truth that had eluded her for so long. Invisibility had been her greatest strength, but being seen by people who mattered was her greatest freedom. She was invisible no more, and somehow that made her even more powerful.